These steps were terribly awkward coming down. One had to step them one by one, and reminded me of the old lady who was walking with one foot on the curb and one foot in the road. And they said to her, "Why are you walking like that?" She said, "Oh, I thought I was lame."
This is obviously going to be my absolute downfall, this interview. So I approach you really as the depressed area's David Frost, Mr. Hitchcock. I don't want to ask you any of the questions I'm sure have bored you over the years. Well, I'd try and avoid them anyway. What interests me, to start the ball rolling, I'm fascinated by writers' diaries, by writers' notebooks, and therefore, as a fellow director, I'm fascinated at the point where you feel yourself committed. Is it in the script? Is it the first day? Is it long before the script? Where do you think it all starts for you?
Well, for me, it all starts with the basic material first. Now, the question, when you have, we'll say, basic material, you may have a novel, you may have a play, you can have an original idea, you can have just a couple of sentences, and from that, the film begins. Now, I work very closely with the writer and begin to construct the film on paper. From the very beginning, we say, well, when we roughly sketch in the whole shape of the film, and then begin from the beginning. And you end up with, say, 100 pages, or maybe even more, of narrative, which is very bad reading for a litterateur. I mean, there are no descriptions of any kind. No, for example, he wondered, because you can't photograph he wondered.
And no camera pans right or any of that?
Not at that
garbage,
stage.
no.
Not at that stage, no. It's as though you were looking at the film on the screen and the sound was turned off. And therefore, to me, this is the first stage. Now, the reason for it is this. It is to urge one, to drive one, to make one work purely in the visual, and not rely upon words at all. Because I'm still a purist, and I do believe that film, being the newest art of the 20th century, is a series of images projected on a screen, and this succession of images create ideas, which in their turn create emotion, just as much as in literature, words put together create sentences, and so on and so forth.
Do you think at that stage, do you think in black and white, or is your preference for color? I mean, do you find yourself thinking in terms of black and white images?
Not at all, no. The color is part of the structure. In other words, you restrain color, bring it in when it's necessary, but don't orchestrate it so loudly that later on you may use it in a word, to mix metaphors a moment, you've exploded your gunpowder.
Yes, I mean, there was something behind that question, because if I may be so bold, I thought there was only one of your films which leaps to mind, which I thought would have been better in black and white, and that was The Birds. I don't know why, this is only a personal preference. I would have preferred to have seen that film in black and white. I wondered why you opted for color.
Well, strange enough you should ask that. I opted for color because The Birds were black and white.
Yes.
So that the faces of the people involved would be separated from the birds.
Yes, my question was really more technical, because I felt the technique of the birds, the phony birds, would have perhaps been less obvious to me if they'd have been in black and white. That was the only thing that I felt.
Well, we actually used real birds. There were no mechanical birds used at all.
Well, there were one or two wooden ones or stationary ones, weren't there?
We hoped that it deceived the eye. But that was purely a matter of quantity rather than quality.
When you say you start with a script, how many, I mean, I know in my own case, the amount of, as it were, stillborn children one has. How many times do you think in your career have you started off with what hopefully you thought was something that was going to excite you, and alas have had to abandon it?
Oh, many times. In the last 2 years, I've abandoned 2 projects. And the point is, you get so far and you realize it's not going to work out. So it's better to lose $150,000 or $200,000 than $2 million.
Yes.
So just dump it and let it go.
I've often found myself, and perhaps you have had the same experience, that although we dump things, certain things, part of the egg remains and continues to gestate, and we pull them out of a drawer, out of our subconscious in years later and use them again in a different context. Does that happen to you?
No, it doesn't happen to me. The only thing that I pigeonhole are certain ideas that belong to a certain genre picture. The adventure film, for example. You store up an idea and you put it away, and one day it will come out. For example, in a picture like North by Northwest, I've waited about 15 years to put Mount Rushmore on the screen.
Yes.
So you keep it back in your mind. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out, because storing this thing up and having the pleasure of anticipating the use of it, the Department of Interior step in. And they say, you mustn't have any character climbing over the faces of the presidents. And you say, why not? They say, oh, because this is the shrine of democracy. You must only have your characters sliding or chasing between the heads. And I was completely defeated, because I had a lovely idea, which I thought, of Cary Grant sliding down Lincoln's nose and then hiding in the nostril of Lincoln.
It's a Kleenex ad.
And the man in search of him is in the vicinity, but unfortunately Cary Grant, hiding in the nostril, begins to have a sneezing fit.
Marvelous.
And I was never allowed to do it.
I think you and I share, talking of actors, we share, shall we say, a certain lack of pleasure at the thought of directing method actors, don't we?
Well, the method actor is all right in the theatre, because he has a free stage to move about. But when it comes to cutting and the face and what he sees and so forth, there must be some discipline. And I remember discussing with a method actor how he was taught and so forth. And he said, oh, we're taught improvisation. We're given an idea, and then we're turned loose to interpret it the way we want to. I said, well, that's not acting, that's writing. And that's why your method actor today always arrives on the set with a new script.
I believe we're going to see one of your own acting performances on another clip which is coming up, which must be the despair of method and non-method actors.
I hope it's short, so that I am not shown suffering the indignity of being an actor for too long.
You asked me to let you hear your voice on the talking picture.
But Hitch, you mustn't do that.
Why not?
Well, because I can speak well.
Do you realize the squad band will be here any moment?
No, really. Oh, my God, I'm terribly frightened.
Why? Have you been a bad woman or something?
Well, not just bad, but
but you slept with men.
Oh, no.
You have not. Come here, stand in your place, otherwise it will not come out right, as the girl said to the soldier. That's enough.
How many years ago was that?
That was 1929.
And who was the lady?
Annie Ondra.
Oh, yes.
She's now married to Max Schmeling, the boxer. Very nice woman, charming. She's Czechoslovakian, actually.
Does she still act? No, presumably
Oh,
not.
no, not at all. No.
Well, shall we invite some questions from the audience
Yes,
on
let's
what we've
do that.
discussed so far?
Sure.
Take the first one down there, sir.
Mr. Hitchcock, you said that the screen should always be charged with emotion. Do you have any particular rules or techniques that help you do this all the time?
Charged with emotion, do you say?
Yes, I saw the quote in a Truffaut book.
Well, pure film is the assembly of pieces of film which in their turn must create an emotion in an audience. That's the whole art of the cinema, the montage of the pieces. So it's merely a matter of design, subject matter, and so forth. I mean, you can't generalize about it. You can only hope that you produce ideas expressed in montage terms that create emotion in an audience. After all, I suppose you've got to go back to the early days of Griffith, and where you have the ride to rescue the man from the guillotine, and the cross-cutting from one to the other, which creates the emotion in the audience. That's the most elementary form.
Again, in the Truffaut book, you mention at one point, or Mr. Truffaut mentions that Psycho, there is virtually no one character in the film with whom one can identify, to which you reply, it wasn't necessary. But surely the almost physical impact of that film is due to the fact that it is the supreme audience identification film. You involve us so much with Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins that the impact of what happens is considerably larger than it would have been previously.
Well, you're involved up to a point, and that's why sometimes the star of a picture in that type of picture is much more helpful, because you worry about him, whereas an unknown you wouldn't worry about him. So it's like, you know, when you walk through the streets and you see a man lying there waiting for an ambulance due to a car accident, and you look at him and you say, poor fellow. But if you take a double look and find it's your brother, you can see the difference in the emotion. So the identification really boils down to, are you 100% anxious about that particular star? The lesser known the person, I think sometimes is your interest is slightly lessened.
Sir, you were next.
In the past, you've been at odds with the head office over the storyline of your films and have been overruled, notably with Suspicion and Secret Agent. Nowadays, now that the studio use your name as the main selling point of the film, do you find you have more freedom in the making?
Yes, I have complete freedom, but that of itself is in a way a handicap, because one enters into the field of financial ethics, and no doubt one can do whatever one wants, but you become restrained by a kind of responsibility. In the cases you mentioned, the earlier one, like Suspicion, for example, with Cary Grant, well, basically he should never have been in the picture to start with, because you run into this problem. You cast a man who is suspected of murder, and then you have to compromise, which is the bad thing. And apropos of that picture, I remember the head of RKO came back from New York, and they just appointed a new head of the studio, a man called Lesser. And with a big grin on his face, he said to me, oh, you should see what Lesser has done to your film Suspicion. I said, what? He said, well, wait and see. But it's now only 55 minutes long. What this man had done, he had gone through the film in my absence and taken out every touch or scene that would indicate the possibility that Cary Grant was a murderer. So there was no film existing at all. Well, that was quite ridiculous. But nevertheless, I had to compromise on the end. The thing I wanted to do with the end of that picture was that the wife was aware that she was going to be murdered by her husband. And so she wrote a letter to her mother saying she was very much in love with him. She didn't want to live anymore. She felt he was going to kill her, but society should be protected. So he brings up this fatal glass of milk. She drinks it, and before she does so, she said, will you mail this letter to Mother? And she drinks the milk and dies. And then you have just one final scene of a cheerful Cary Grant going to the mailbox and popping the letter in. But it was never permitted, you see, because of the basic error in casting.
I can't seduce you to come back to Elstree for me and remake it, can I?
Well, wouldn't be difficult.
Next question. That one.
I wondered, had you ever been tempted to step outside the sort of thriller limitation and do something completely different? Or is it the attraction, is the limitation the attraction to do something new?
Well, no, it's not for me. It's the public, you see. If I made, for example, a musical, the public would wonder, when will the moment come when one of the chorus girls will drop dead? And what from?
Gentleman at the back, nearly next to the lady in green. Yes, you, sir.
Apart from self-satisfaction, Mr. Hitchcock, what is your basic motive for making the films that you do make?
Basic motive? Money. There's an old expression which says, all work and no play makes Jack.
Yes.
Mr. Hitchcock, you said that you have in your mental back drawer, mental bottom drawer, if you like, a series of bizarre or locations or backdrops. Which one would you most like to use in your films and haven't had yet the opportunity to do so?
Well, I once had an idea that I would like to open a film, say at the Covent Garden Opera or the Metropolitan or the Scala in Milan, and Maria Callas is on the stage singing an aria, and her head is tilted upwards, and she sees in a box way up a man approach the back of another man and stab him. She is just reaching a high note, and the high note turns to a scream, and it's the highest note she's ever sung in her life. The result of which she gets a huge round of applause. I don't know the rest.
Make that one for me. I'll buy that. Just up here. Yes. No, the lady, please. Sorry.
Mr. Hitchcock, I wanted to know, as I was scared stiff by Psycho, what frightens you?
Policemen frighten me. No, the
Not English policemen, surely.
Oh, the worst. Because they're so polite.
In Marnie, there was a lot of criticism about the art direction. One sequence I remember in particular, the street scene in the harbour, it seemed very bad for one who was so interested in art direction as yourself. Can you tell us the story behind this?
I agree with you. It was a bad scene.
If only Hansard was like this.
Mr. Hitchcock, you seem to have a very nice sense of humor, which you obviously had before you established yourself as a thriller, directing thrillers. How come you've never had any comedies?
But every film I make is a comedy.
Nothing newer than last month.
I don't suppose there is such a thing as a wireless set hereabouts.
Oh, well, being in the dark like this, you know, Collicut, our communications cut off in a time of crisis.
Hello, hello, hello. London? You want Mr. Seltzer? Yes. Hold on. I'm going right to find him where he is.
London.
Go on, risk it.
Hello, you in London, huh? No, I'm not Mr. Seltzer. Name's Charters. I don't suppose you know me, huh? Well, you needn't worry. I've just gone to fetch him. Tell me, what's happening to England? Blowing a gale? No, you don't follow me, sir. I'm inquiring about the test match in Manchester. Cricket, sir, cricket. What, you don't know? You can't be in England and not know the test score. Felicity doesn't know.
Silly ass.
Hello, can't you find out? Oh, nonsense, it won't take a second. Oh, all right. If you won't, you won't. Wasting my time, the fellow's an ignoramus.
Mr. Seltzer, at last your call come through to London. Hello. Can we take a crash sticker for London? Huh? Medical travel London. Oh, sacre.
So what I find so fascinating about that, I think not only is their timing impeccable, but I think your timing is impeccable. Because I think you don't fuss. You let the actors like that, who have their own instinctive timing, you don't mess about with it in the cutting room.
No.
So many films are ruined because a false sense of timing is put onto a comedian. And forgive me if I've got it totally wrong. You never worked with Laurel and Hardy in any shape or form.
No, not at all.
No. Would you have liked to done? Because out of all this sort of old-time comedians, they're the people I think admire most.
I don't think I could have done because I was already Hardy in size.
But does that type of humor attract you as an individual?
Oh, yes, it does. Oh, yes. No
What
question.
makes you laugh?
Oh, I think one of the funniest films I ever saw was Laurel and Hardy in a film called Bonnie Scotland.
Oh, yes, yes.
You remember that?
Yes, yeah.
And the longest take I've ever seen on the screen, when the two of them are standing on a Scottish bridge, and I think it was Laurel who was taking snuff, and he sneezed, and he sneezed right into the snuff box, and all the snuff blew into Hardy's face.
Yes, a marvelous.
And there was the longest take before anything happened
He was a master.
I've ever seen. And finally this long sneeze came, so big that it tilted him back into the river below. And then Hardy was left on the bridge, and nothing came up but water and fish every few seconds, like that.
Yes, marvelous sequence. Can I have another question, please? Over there.
You mentioned earlier on 2 abandoned projects. Was one of these Mary Rose? If not, can we expect to see it in the future?
Well, in Mary Rose, I have that on one side, and I'm trying to attack it from a science fiction angle, because I'm sure the public will want to know, where did a girl go when she disappeared for 25 years and came back as young as she was when she disappeared? And I think it's going to come when we find the solution about the body being atomized, which it will be in some years' time, there'll be the power to atomize the body and move it away elsewhere and reassemble it again.
In the eternal cutting rooms.
Mm-hmm.
There was another question from that part of the house. Yes, you, sir.
There's a great deal written about your cinema films, but some of your TV work is also excellent. I know some of the episodes that Robert Stevens directed got Emmy Awards. Could you tell us a little about these? Are there any which you remember with particular affection? And, for instance, how do you select directors for those episodes which you don't do yourself?
When that series started, it was actually based on the English short story. It was essentially the short story that inspired the series, and we had lots to draw upon, and I think we used most of them that were ever written, because in the early days, in the 20s, most of our important litterateurs always went in for the short story, whether it was Galsworthy, Hugh Walpole, or Mrs. Lowndes. There were a whole lot of people.
Blackwood.
A tremendous lot. And I made one once, which took me just 2 days to do. I think it was a Roald Dahl story called Lamb to the Slaughter. And this was a story of a young wife played by Barbara Bel Geddes. And she was preparing dinner. And of course, in America, you know, they can take food out of the deep freeze and put it straight into the oven. Because when you buy a cooking oven, the brochure that comes with it tells you the timing for frozen food or non-frozen food. Anyway, she's preparing dinner, and her husband, who's the chief of police, comes home and tells her they're all washed up, there's another woman. And she's rather stunned by this, and she almost in a trauma goes out to the garage and takes a leg of lamb, which is frozen, out of the deep freeze, and comes back, and she finds her husband rummaging through the desk drawer. And she said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm getting my things together." She said, "You're not going tonight." He said, "You try and stop me." And this thing infuriates her that she goes up behind him with the frozen leg of lamb and kills him, hits him on the back of the head. And still in a daze, she goes and puts it in the oven, turns the gas on, and prepares the rest of the meal. And she comes back and realizes she must do something about this dead body. So she wrecks the room as though it were a fight and calls the police. And she's acquainted with all of them, and very soon the whole rigmarole is going on. The photographer, the fingerprint man, and the doctor. And the chief detective is saying, "Well, Doc, what instrument was used?" He said, "Well, as far as I can see, examining the body, it's that shape, like that." He said, "It's narrow because a hand must hold it, and yet the bruise is very flat." And the investigation goes on, and they're searching for the weapon and can't find it. And finally, two of the men go in the kitchen, and here's this leg of lamb sizzling away. And they come back and they say to her, "Look, you've forgotten your dinner." "Oh, fellas," she said, "I can't be bothered with the dinner after all that's happened here. Why don't you have it? You have it, you know." And finally you end with all the detectives and police sitting round the table, just having finished the leg of lamb, and one of them says, "Well, I don't know, for all we know, it may be under our very noses." And that's the end of the story. Of course, when you make that kind of TV film, the censor must step in, because there's a need for what is called the retribution clause. She cannot get away with it. So I come on in a supermarket at the end, wheeling the usual basket, and I stop and I said, "You know, she married a second time, but the second time she forgot to turn on the deep freeze." And that was the payoff.
Do you find time to see other people's films? And, for instance, do you find as much pleasure in Truffaut's films as he finds in yours?
Of course.
What sort of films do you like watching?
Oh, I don't mind. I have pretty broad tastes, you know. I see them, you know, privately in the projection room. Some of the Italian films I like, you know, Fellini and those fellas.
Sir.
Mr. Hitchcock, is there any film you wish you had never made?
Lots of them. I can't particularize, really, but there are several.
Have you ever thought of combining, say, 2 or 3 short stories in different moods in one cinema film?
Not really. I think it's very hard to expect an audience to look at a film and then take a pause and then start all over again. That's why the motion picture as we know it, in its best form, is more akin to the short story. It's the only medium, apart from the short story, where we expect an audience to sit down for 2 hours and watch a thing continuously without a break. And I don't really think there have been many successful films that have been broken up in that way.
Mr. Hitchcock, could you tell us when you first had the idea of appearing in all your films? I think it started with The Lodger, and could you tell us why? Because I don't know of any other filmmaker that does it.
No, in those early days we ran out of actors. That's really true.
Have you ever bothered to join Equity?
No, but I think they pay a stand-in for me.
Are they? Are they after you?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Gentleman in the centre here, or the lady, is it? Which, where the 2 hands went up? Was it yours, madam? Yes, please.
Mr. Hitchcock, which of your films gave you the most personal satisfaction, and why?
Well, probably 2 films. The first one is a picture called Shadow of a Doubt, which I wrote with Thornton Wilder. And this was one of those rare occasions when suspense and melodrama combined well with character. And it was shot in the original town, and at that time they were shooting an awful lot on the back lot. So it had a freshness. The other film is Rear Window, because to me that's probably the most cinematic film one has made. And most people don't really recognize this because the man is in one room and in one position. But nevertheless, it's the montage and the cutting of what he sees and its effect on him that creates the whole atmosphere and drama of the film. In other words, the visual is transferred to emotional ideas, and that film lent itself to that.
Would you say, Mr. Hitchcock, it'd be fair comment to say that your films have never really been concerned with social consciousness, as we, now bandy around the term? You haven't really taken note of your own times. You've ploughed your own furrow, as it were.
That's true. Samuel Goldwyn once said, "Messages are for Western Union."
Yes, I don't think the applause is actually well placed, because not all films that fall into that category are necessarily bad films, and Goldwyn was getting a cheap laugh, really, which has echoed down the years and may bury him. But what I meant was, a subject came my way, which is an American subject, and would seem to me, on the face of it, to be ideally suited for you. It's a true life thing. It's called Witness to a Killing, and it's based on that New York murder where 56 people saw a girl stabbed to death in the street and did nothing about it. Would that sort of subject attract you at all?
Yes, except that it is an objective approach, and it would be very hard to get an audience involved in that.
It's interesting.
It would be hard to... it would be objective from an audience point of view. They would be examining the behavior pattern of the people who witnessed it. And therefore the comment would be can you imagine how irresponsible people are when it comes to being involved? They'd rather not be involved.
Yes.
But the comment would come from the onlooker rather than provide them with any particular emotion.
Do you get any of your ideas or stories from headlines or from news
Sometimes,
items?
yes.
Yeah.
I made a picture of Wrong Man once, which was a recount of an actual case of wrongful arrest. I shot it in the actual places where everything occurred. Even I was allowed to photograph the trial in the same courtroom, with the judge sitting beside me as technical advisor. And the people kept coming up and whispering to me, saying, "The judge is wrong. The judge is wrong." And we had to wait until the judge went out of the court to put things right.
Take another question from there.
Mr. Hitchcock, what do you think of the current trend in the cinema towards nudity and frank love scenes, and how will it affect you in the future in your filmmaking?
Or your own appearances?
You mean in the nude?
Yes. Yes. When can we expect your first nude appearance?
No, never. I think that's a passing phase. After all, how far can you go with nudity or sexual relations? You know, it would seem that we're all waiting for that zoom in to a close-up of the sexual act. And how close can we get to it? Once you've reached that point, then where do you go? And after all, it makes no difference to me because that scene I've already done. I did it in the end of a picture called North by Northwest, where I showed Cary Grant pull a girl into an upper berth, and then I cut to the phallic train entering the tunnel.
Next tunnel. Yusuf.
With your latest films, I feel that Torn Curtains perhaps is the least successful. First of all, do you agree, and do you think it might be slightly miscast?
I was totally miscast. Sure. I should have had, in that film, a singing scientist.
You, sir.
Mr. Hitchcock, about Torn Curtain, could I ask you how you got political permission to shoot exteriors in East Berlin? And also how you managed to control the color in the exteriors so well?
We never shot in East Berlin.
And you also asked, how did you manage to control the color?
Well, you can always control color by desaturation. See, Technicolor have a very wide range, and they can desaturate color and wash it out almost as you can on a TV set. You know, in a color TV set, you can twist that knob until you can get practically black and white if you want it. And Technicolor can do the same.
Sir. Yes.
Mr. Hitchcock, in your film Under Capricorn, you deal with a subject which one wouldn't usually associate with you. Can you tell us why you made this film and how you feel about it now?
The film was done more or less for the benefit of Ingrid Bergman. That was a case of trying to find a subject to suit the star, which I don't believe in. So it was really a compromise. And also, of course, the bad thing for me was that it was a costume picture, which to me have no appeal because I've never been very good at it. And to me, no one in a costume picture ever goes to the toilet.
On that sanitary note, should we have another clip from a film we've been talking about, Torn Curtain? One of the interesting things about that sequence is a few years ago, that would probably have been saturated with music, wouldn't it?
Oh,
As the
yes,
knife
yes.
came, there'd have been wah,
Yes,
wah,
yes.
you know, there'd have been the old... I mean, I applaud the fact that there is no music, you know, yes.
Mr. Hitchcock, in that last sequence, I think you could easily be accused of unnecessary or tastelessness, really. The blood in it and the really gratuitous violence. It seems to me that you've never really done anything as nauseating or stomach-turning as that, even in Psycho. You know, I know it's great direction, but I think you could be accused of being unnecessarily tasteless in that. Have you anything to say about that?
I would say that the demonstration of the scene is intended to show how difficult it is to kill a man. That is, it is a messy business, it is a horrible business, and it should be a deterrent because it's not all that easy. They usually show the killings on the screen very simple, a gun shot and bang, you're dead. But if you don't have a gun or can't use a gun, it just shows you what a horrible, awful thing it is to kill someone. Especially, as you see at the end, in Auschwitz.
You, sir?
In the light of that, were you surprised when people laughed at that sequence just now?
That's the usual reaction.
Are you pleased with that kind of reaction?
Of course.
You are? That means it's money in the box office.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but you...
No, I mean, do you care why people enjoy your sequences?
Yes, because that's the emotion emerging.
I see.
But why do you prefer people to laugh at something like that?
Because that's a release of tension.
But it's not funny.
No, but it is a relief. People who want to find relief will find their own ways. In a scene like that, it wasn't possible to give them the relief from the tension all the way through because of the nature of the scene, the need to have to kill the man. Usually when you're setting up a tense sequence, it behooves you to make sure that you get the moments of relief from the tension. Sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. There's a case where it didn't provide the opportunity.
Can we just pursue, before I take another question, can we just pursue this, because it's a very interesting topic. We've discussed, you know, how far nudity has gone, can go, should go. Would anybody else like to comment further on the question of violence in the cinema and as applied, not necessarily as Mr. Hitchcock applies it, but ask him how other directors apply it? I mean, taking your question and your question, sir, you say, you know, that, no, somebody over there said how tasteless it was. I mean, where do you think violence on the screen should begin and end, as it were? Would anybody like to phrase a question or comment on that? You, sir?
But in fact, we've seen that sequence out of context, but an audience, had an audience seeing the film from the beginning to the end, who would laugh during that period of time? I think that the tendency is that people with certain sadistic tendencies would laugh, whereas I think if we had seen it in context, that we generally would not laugh, as we have here. I think we were predisposed to laughing in the sequence.
Would a sadist like to comment on that? We're one of the laughing sadists. Would they like to reveal themselves? Are you a laughing sadist, madam?
No, it is a release of tension. I've come out, you know, laughing and saying, brilliant, marvellous how he got round it, you know, terrific scene. But it's definitely
Do you
a
normally
release
laugh
of
when you're
emotion.
terrorized in real life?
I am a sadist.
Do you think people in real life laugh when they're terrorized?
Well, they always come off the scenic railway giggling. They scream while they're on it. Or people at the fairground come out of the haunted house. Well, they've paid money to be scared, but when they come out, they're giggling always. I think the prime example is when it all began, when a 3-month-old child is held in its mother's arms, and the mother says, "Boo!" And the child suddenly is startled, gets the hiccups, and then it laughs, and mother laughs, and all seems to be satisfied. Why mother says boo to the child, I don't know, but they're still doing it. Sometimes the laughter takes other forms. It takes the form of humor about the situation. I remember years ago, they used to have at Islington here, they called it the World's Fair. And it was a sort of merry-go-rounds and sideshows and that sort of thing. And in one of the tents, which only cost about a few pennies to go in, no forms to sit on, just stand there, and on the platform there was a man biting the heads from live rats. And the whole people were sort of petrified at this exhibition. But there were 2 child ladies at the back, and one of them, naturally to relieve her horror and tension at this, she called out with clenched teeth, she said, "Don't you want any bread with it?"
Have you ever witnessed, which I believe was quite popular in sideshows some years ago, regurgitation acts, where people swallowed live rats and then regurgitated them? There was a man called Dan Mannix who wrote a book about it.
No,
Have you ever
I
seen
never
one of
saw
those?
that, no. Why regurgitate it? Let it stay down.
Well,
who wants the rat back?
Well, the climax of his act was to swallow 2 rats, who then proceeded to fight in his stomach. And he ended up by swallowing large quantities of water.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the rats fought and he burped.
You, sir.
Sir, about the relationship of the filmmaker and the film goer, you seem to see your role as a rather passive sort of one. I mean, you make the sort of films that audiences are going to come back and see again. Are you happy with this situation, or are there films which you would like to make but haven't because you feel that audiences aren't ready for them?
Well, after all, somebody once said years ago, a play is not written or complete without an audience. You can have a play, for example, you can rehearse it, you can have a complete run through, but until that audience witnesses that play, the whole thing is incomplete. And the same thing, to some extent, applies to a film. In other words, there's no satisfaction in having a big auditorium like this and having one seat in the center and then showing the film. It's the collective audience and their reactions that is of interest and must promote your endeavors. After all, what greater satisfaction can a filmmaker have to know that a given scene that he's devised in a film, to know that on the same evening in Tokyo, West Berlin, London and New York, the audience are all reacting in the same way. That's the power of the cinema. Theater doesn't have it. Literature doesn't get the chance to have it. But we are able, by the manner of copying films and placing them in movie houses all over the world, and that is the greatest satisfaction one can have.
Oh, Mr. Hitchcock, on behalf of this collective audience, I'm sure they'd wish me to thank you for your usual inspired and urbane performance. For myself, I can't say I've actually sat at the feet of the master, but in years to come I can say I shared a sofa with you.
Good.
I'm very privileged. Thank you very much.
Famous names shine on like stars that they are. Choose another icon's story in profile on iPlayer now.